Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another show for the first in a new series. I feel like I'm announcing a new series every week with the amount of shows that we're doing on the channel at the moment. But, of course, we did launch our brand new website 2 weeks ago. Link is in the description. Please make sure you go and check that out. And what I thought would be quite cool is if I got our regular writers onto a show once every week, fortnight, depending on availability and other things, to discuss all of the latest news and, of course, look ahead to some of the articles and the sort of fixtures that we're going to be writing about. But today has been insane. Me and Drew obviously did the Tactical Breakdown podcast earlier on today before everything kicked off, where we talked about Willian and Coutinho. And since then, I went to do some painting in the garden and came back 30 minutes later to see my phone absolutely blown up with notifications, mainly from Drew, telling me all of this stuff that had just happened at the club. The club put an announcement out about the redundancies. And then just before we go live, about an hour ago, we're treated to the news that the Brazilian centre-back Gabriel from Lille is possibly one step closer to joining Arsenal. So we've got plenty to talk about, and I'm joined by three wonderful people to do that with. Hello, people. How are we doing?
Great.
There's some crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? So, of course, let's run through my guests. John, thank you ever so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. Obviously, you've been writing. I'm looking forward to your next piece because it's going to be another interview. The first one was obviously about your good self, and you're going to start running this interview series with fans and getting their fan stories. Do you want to give people a little insight into what they can expect?
Yeah, so really, the basis of it is just to show that the experience of being an Arsenal fan and how much different people experience being a fan across the world. And I think it's interesting because it allows you to kind of realize that there's other ways of supporting this club than maybe what you're used to or even thought was even possible. So that should be pretty interesting. And I got some cool ones lined up.
Awesome. So make sure you check that one out. If you haven't already, please make sure you give John's article about his journey as an American coming over to London and watching his first Arsenal game a read. It is a fantastic one. Secondly, we've got Owen. Owen, of course, you've been running your biographical series. So far, we've experienced the wonders of Tierney and then Granit Xhaka. Who have you got next lined up?
So this week, Friday, hopefully, I'll have my bio coming out on David Luiz. Basically just sort of delving into David's upbringing and the early stages of his career right through to Arsenal. I thought I'd choose David this time just because after researching into him, it's quite surprising the accolades that he has throughout his career. And although we know that he divides opinion within the world of football as to how good he is, I just thought that his upbringing, his story, the relationships he had with people throughout his career was just massively interesting, and it's a story that needed to be told.
Of course, and his agent is a certain someone that was going to feature heavily tonight, it's probably fair to say, when we get onto that sort of stuff. So, yes, please make sure you check out Owen's pieces on Tierney and Granit Xhaka so far. They've been fantastic to learn a little bit more about these guys. Link in the description. And finally, after spending an hour-long podcast with him earlier, it is difficult to have to sit down for another hour or so. But we digress. Drew, how are you doing, my bestest buddy in the whole wide world?
I've got to look at your silly mug for another hour and a half. So how do you think I feel? No, but I'm doing well. And I was supposed to do a William piece and an Oba piece this week, but given everything that's going on today, you and I spoke about it. I'm going to shift gears and try to spin a positive about everything that's potentially going on with the club currently, and we'll get on to it in a minute, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, and of course, you've been doing quite a few pieces on Arteta and a lot to do with the transfer side of things as well, and seeing where the club could go, which feeds quite nicely into what we're going to talk about. In terms of my own self, we've been putting out quite a few pieces post FA Cup, pre-FA Cup, Thomas Partey, and I was going to put out a piece tomorrow on the formation changes, but again, similar to Drew, things have changed quite a bit, and that means that we've changed tact ever so slightly. So, we're going to get involved with all of that, and obviously you can check out the articles, but we're here as a team to discuss the latest headlines around Arsenal and the latest news. And the first one that I want to kick off with is, as TD Shifts, one of our members who joined us on our Expert Member podcast, says with his super chat, thank you so much for the support, mate. Says, hey, Tom, Gabriel has been spotted in London. You can check it out on his Twitter, is what he says. Cheap plug there. That's apparently how much advertisement costs on the channel now, $5. There you go. So please do go check that out. But who is TD Shifts? Well, he joined us obviously on the Expert Members podcast. But in terms of Gabriel, that is sort of where we're going to aim our first 10 minutes. Gabriel, who, says Johnny Walsh? Well, you can actually check out the Tactical Breakdown podcast. And prior to the show, John was trying to educate himself on Gabriel. And I said to him, I was like, John, you know, we do a Tactical Breakdown show, which you can go and look at the play. And he was like, nah, I'll just go watch a YouTube compilation. So,
I'm a busy man, Tom. I'm a busy man.
What did you discover, John? What did you discover?
I discovered he's got a good left foot on him. I think there was a little confusion as to what foot he was, but I was watching it, and he's definitely left-footed, and he definitely occupies that left-sided space really well. And they classified him as a combative defenseman, which I think definitely is what I saw there. Obviously, and you can't really get much from a YouTube compilation, but I definitely was able to see that there is a left foot there, and it should be good, because right now I think with Luis, we definitely have that outlet to the left side, but that outlet to the right side I don't think is there as much, and I think that a lot of our play is stuck towards the left because of that. In part, there's other reasons why, but that's one of them. So it should be interesting to see what kind, like a good distributing defenseman on that with a left foot on that side would be able to do a lot better.
Yeah, I'm looking at the stats there. You can see from the heat map, he's massively left-sided in terms of where he plays on the pitch. And we know that Arteta loves a left-footed, left-sided centre-back. We saw his commitment to playing Kolasinac on that side, even when no one, especially you, John, I mean, every single time Kolasinac popped up, we saw a WhatsApp chat of no going into the WhatsApp group. So hopefully we can see this guy come in and replace him, whether we maintain that three at the back, of course, or we switch to a back four. Owen, I don't know how much you know about the guy, how much you've looked into him, but you were talking about, obviously, before we came on, with the thinking that Saliba and Gabriel could be a centre-back pairing that we see at Arsenal in the future. It seems levels above what we've had at the club in the past, does it not?
Definitely 100%. It has the potential to become a very good centre-back pairing, but the one thing that I would say to take us all back down a little is that we can't heap too much pressure on either of these guys if Gabriel does come in, that is, but also on Saliba. In hindsight now, just touching back on David Luiz, I think that this is the prime time to take in someone like Gabriel and someone like Saliba to start solidifying themselves as a pairing while they have that mentor there in David Luiz. I haven't seen a massive amount of him just in the sort of Champions League, but from what I have gathered, he's very, very good physically. He's a big enough guy. He's quite fast. He's not afraid to put himself about. He would be a little different from Saliba in the fact that he would be less inclined to dribble the ball out. And he's just sort of more of an old school defender, which is something that we have absolutely craved for years.
Yeah, we've needed someone to be that sort of guy. And we were talking off air as well about how the partnership with a more ball-playing centre-back like Saliba could complement each other well. We were looking at sort of Akin to Koscielny and Per Mertesacker and that sort of combo that was so successful at the club. Thank you, Carter Stage, for joining up as a new member. You've joined a fantastic group of people. Look out on the community tab for some fantastic exclusive content coming your way very soon. Drew, my best buddy. Gabriel, what are we thinking about him? Is he someone that I know that your Bundesliga is your baby, but how much have you seen of the guy, and what are your thoughts on a possible 30 million euro deal, which is what is being touted around at the moment?
I mean, it's enough to think that it's going to improve us. And, I think we spoke about earlier, right now we're in a position where we have to move forward, and I know we have an absolute overload on center backs at the club at the minute, but it's clear that a lot of them aren't going to be here moving forward. Gabriel's young. Was he 22? So as we said on the pod earlier today, Socrates and Luiz are done after the coming season. There's going to be questions about what happens with Mavropanos. We don't know if Holding or Chambers are going to really make the grade moving forward as well. So if Gabriel can come in and really improve us, I'm totally fine with it. It also suits the need of Arteta clearly wanting a left-footed center back playing at left center back, and if that can help really bed in how we want to build from the back through possession. I'm all for it, especially for the caveat that if we can afford it. And I do think that we haven't seen outgoings yet, but I think we are going to bin players this summer. I think that's evident. I don't think we have enough funds currently to be doing what we want to be doing unless we're having outgoings. So, I mean, again, I'm fine with it. There'll be other questions around the deal. People have already put into the chat about, the direct link with all the Brazilian players we're being linked with and how they're linked with Kia on some level or directly. So that'll be coming up for discussion later. But in terms of the player himself, if he checks all the boxes, and I think it's also been made clear that Arteta has a massive say in the players that we're bringing in. He gets a voice. He's not making the signings like Wenger would, but he would say, I need these types of players, or I like these players, please go sign them, and we're getting deals done for it. Willian's another example where it broke that Arteta's the one leading the charge to bring Willian into the club. So if he has a voice and he knows what he needs to get it done on the pitch, then I'm doubly all for it. I think that's all you kind of really need to know.
Yeah. That's obviously there's only so much we can really do to talk about a player which we're not watching week in, week out. If you do want to know more about Gabriel, all you need to do is go into your YouTube search bar and type Gabriel #tactical breakdown, and you can find a fantastic video on him with the help and insight of French football expert Jeremy Smith. John, I'm talking to you. So do make sure, people, you go check that one out. It will give you information. Maybe we end up doing an updated version of it. Obviously, that one was 5 months ago now, but obviously that was pre-lockdown, and Liga hasn't played any football since then. So it's pretty much as up to date as you could possibly get regarding the guy. So there you go. The main reason we did this show, though, not only to make it a weekly thing, is because it was kind of spawned from the idea that we talk about the latest Arsenal news and make any links to any articles that we're putting up. But today has been so heavy in terms of Arsenal content and quite shocking stuff, if we're honest, that it's probably you'll see the most of this show be discussing that. And that's what we're going to do now. John, starting with you. Have you checked that tactical breakdown video? Have you watched it?
Yeah, I just watched it just now. It was excellent. Absolutely great. If you listen, everyone, go watch it right now.
But the news, obviously, that first came out is there was a statement on the Arsenal website. There was hardly any details really besides the fact that Arsenal were cutting their staff by 55 people, effectively. Mm-hmm. We'll go into some of the intricacies about who those people are in a little, but your initial reaction to that, we've already seen Arsenal, of course, force them effectively to take a 25% pay cut. Right. And that was then subsidized after the FA Cup win. We've seen linked to the club on big money and big signing on fees, if you believe the latest Willian situation. Yeah. How did you react to see that the club are going ahead with a billionaire owner to cut 55 people from their roster?
So first of all, I've seen some reactions to it, and I've seen people kind of liken it, like saying how can you possibly justify spending all this money on a player when you need to cut all of your employees, which I think is a real misunderstanding of how kind of business in general works. And the analogy I made was like going to a grocery store owner and saying, how dare you fire your stock boy when you buy groceries to fill the shelves? Like clearly, if it's not protectual, and I'll get into that in a minute, if in fact there is issues regarding being everyone the salary, due to the pandemic and any kind of cutbacks and stuff like that, the fact that they need to do their operations on the pitch, which is the main function of a football club, is not something that you can use as a sword against them when they need to make those kind of cuts for the further of the actual club, right? Yeah. Sorry, I got mixed up in my head. It was reading others.
That was my fault. Private message.
Yeah. He sent me a private message. You're trying to mess me up here. But so going back to it, I think that my overall feeling of it is that I hope it's not protectual. I mentioned that a little earlier, meaning that I hope that they've actually evaluated what their needs in order to get success on the pitch, and actually make a informed decision as to whether they're going to be able to continue to pay everyone as well as being able to excel on the pitch. If the answer to both of those was no, then they have to make a business decision. We got to look at it from that perspective. That's all that really is. If it's not protectual, if it's not some kind of weird power struggle, which me and Drew got into a conversation about earlier, and I'm sure we could talk about a little bit, then in that case, I think that you can't really blame them if they need to make a business decision. Sometimes they're difficult. Anyone who owns a business knows sometimes you have to make difficult decisions for the betterment of that business, and that could include cutting personnel that you otherwise wouldn't want to.
You would call me Mig message, wouldn't you? Yeah, I get your. Am I lagging, by the way? Some people have said I'm lagging.
Yes, it's slight, but you're okay now.
Okay, I'll see if I can sort that out in just a second. Owen, in terms of sort of where your head's at, seeing the reaction from people, do you think it's a hyperbolic reaction from the social media in general, or is it as you'd expect?
No, well, look, as you says, we'll touch on it later on. But when I initially read the article, I was just coming in from work and I just glazed over it. My initial assumption was that when I seen the 55 redundancies, that it was match day staff. And my thinking was that maybe some clarity has been shed on the situation regarding fans attending games next season. And maybe the club had just thought it's senseless to keep these people on the books when it's sort of an open-ended delay to fans coming back in, and there's no idea really of when they're coming back. So that's where my head was at. In regards to the reaction, I'd be quite similar to John. I think that we buy in personally and invest in people a little too much, and we'll have to remember that this is a business, and sometimes these harsh decisions are needed. What we have to remember as well is that if the club turn around now and release a statement and it says, look, we're going to keep all our staff on the books, there's going to be no pay deductions, no nothing, but we aren't going to sign anybody in the up and coming transfer window, there would be uproar. So I think the club are stuck between a rock and a hard place as to what to do. As I said, we'll touch on it later, but I mentioned pre-pod that my main moral issue with this is that if the 55 redundancies have been made to blanket some sort of hidden agenda, that the club are looking to transition, to make a transition systemically. So yeah, that's where my head's at with it.
I think, we spoke pre-pod. I think we're kind of all in agreement where, Arsenal is hardly the only business / corporation in the world right now that's cutting losses. Not losses, but they're cutting employees because of COVID. And I really do think that a lot of the fans don't really understand how hard the club was hit. And if they can, it's called penny pinching. If they can penny pinch in any sort of way to help any matters financially, they're going to have to do it. And again, like for example, here in the United States, people are cutting jobs massively. There's going to be another wave of job cuts like in October because of the prolonged effects of what COVID's been happening. And it's been made clear that apart from Walmart, that's the only holding that Kroenke has access to that actually made money during COVID. Every other entity that he has in his portfolio has taken a big loss because of COVID. So right. that includes Arsenal. And unfortunately, when financial struggles happen, people do lose their jobs. This isn't like a thing where Arsenal is the bad boogeyman and they're the only entity on the planet that are letting people go. Everybody's letting people go right now in every facet of the working world. So, and I know that Arsenal is a club of the community and we want to hold ties and lift things up. But unfortunately, like, you do have to make tough decisions when you own a business, as John already alluded to earlier. It's unfortunate, but it's not a stick to beat the club with. But I think people have, and they tried to make the correlation between like, oh, but Mesut Ozil's on $350K a week. That has nothing to do with it. And as John mentioned before, people are just saying, well, why don't you just bend Ozil's contract? Because then you can have a massive lawsuit. You have all these residual things you have to deal with doing things like that. It's just not that simple. And I think people need to think rationally instead of thinking romantically and passionately about a situation that has nothing to do with that. So I know, John, you want to come on to something. So
yeah. Briefly, you mentioned how difficult it is for all these businesses and stuff. But when you look at Arsenal, We know that a lot of our revenue is derived from ticket sales and actual appearances at the more so than a lot of clubs in the Premier League. We see that in all the financials that a significant amount of our income is actually derived from those kind of things. So I think we are uniquely impacted by this whole COVID situation in a way that I think other clubs might not be as much. Which is why you might not be seeing as many clubs having to do this, or at least being as public or anyone really noticing as much as we have, or on the scale that we have. And look, some of that could be pretextual, like we were saying earlier, meaning that they could be saying it's because of COVID and it's really for some other reason. If that's the case, I think that's concerning. I don't think there's any evidence of that right now, but we're taking what they're saying at face value, right? And assuming that statement's actual reality. So when you look at it from an impact, we are absolutely impacted by COVID, especially because there's no fans in the stadiums anymore, and a lot of our revenue comes from that.
Yeah, well, that's
go on. Sorry.
No, just a quick point. Just look, it's not a a mathematical genius thing here, but I was just sitting. So we've said a few times, the outgoings of the club on a monthly basis is approximately £28 million per month. So really that means that from football has ceased and fans have stopped being into the stadium, we've lost over £140 million. And look, I as you said, the billionaire owners, but when billionaire owners have multiple franchises to worry about and they're taking hits at all of them and they're losing their biggest stream of revenue, and let's face it, we don't know when fans are going to be allowed back into the stadium. So as I say, I'm not a cranky apologist. I have the same concerns about our ownership as most, but you have to sit and think rationally. Regardless of who you are, £140 million on one of your multiple franchises, that much of a loss is huge, regardless of what your wealth is.
It'll have an impact on sort of his position in certain other deals that he wants to do. If his businesses are going downhill in terms of their value, in terms of what's going on at the clubs, that will need to come into his thinking. And if it means that people are made redundant, I mean, look at Virgin Atlantic that just went into liquidation today. I think it was. Richard Branson, billionaire, one of the biggest billionaires I think on the planet, and they're losing countless jobs because no one is flying at the moment. No one is going to football matches, and no one is using flights, and still they are in massive problems. You can't just, as a billionaire owner, click your fingers and those things happen. People think that it's because people are very nice, unfortunately, and I mean that in the nicest way, is that people are thinking of this from a moral perspective, which I completely understand, and I get that. It's just when you look at it from a business perspective, that's the reason why these are taken. However, what I will say is, and Drew, feel free to come in on this, I know you'll want to, is that Mesut Ozil is currently on 350 grand a week. Here we go. And the 55 people that have been made redundant amounts to around, I think it is £6 million per year saved in terms of salary, which is less than a third of what Ozil is earning in his year. And a lot of people have said, how can Arsenal be in a position to be paying their players and having their players on this amount of money and get rid of that many people at the club?
I'm not quite sure what you're expecting me to say, apart from the fact that to go to Ozil and say, listen, we got hit pretty hard by COVID, so goodbye. That does not work. Contractual agreements don't work that way. Yeah. And as John alluded to before we went on, you have things like Ozil's image rights are highly tied to Arsenal and Adidas as well. Even though he was just let go, there will still be residual payments he's still receiving until that deal actually runs down. What they said is they're not going to re-up him. They didn't just drop him. After whatever year, his deal with Adidas is done. That deal is still going on, which is why he still wears Adidas boots. You have all these little things. You have all these guaranteed things in this contract that we don't know about in terms of money. If you're just going to just say, listen, we need to save money, you've got to go, that's going to open up a whole load of issues. First and foremost, to cancel his contract early is going to be of the rough equivalent of going out and spending like £15 million on a player. So the club then has to shell out £15 million of otherwise it could have spent elsewhere to get rid of a contract. Let's say, just for an example, they have to worry about the image rights, as John's talked about. They have to worry about potential legal actions afterwards. You have to worry about all these little things. And also, you could also say he's not the only player on high wages you could just get rid of. You could easily just tell the same thing to Socrates. who is on 100K a week, which can also cover the things that we are just talking about. So it's not, people will just find a way to use Ozil as a convenient stick to beat with. But there's a lot of other players you could easily just do the same treatment with and just bin. And I'm not just saying that because I appreciate what Mesut Ozil's done as a footballer over the course of his career, but I get annoyed with any inkling of a window of people to mention Mesut Ozil's name in terms of the club. They will find a way to connect it and then use it, and that frustrates me. Just in terms of logic, it's not, things aren't so cut and dry. You can't just say you're not here anymore, you got to go. In terms of players, it's not how contractual agreements work. That's why lawyers are in when your player's signing a contract. These things will be discussed. So we as fans can speculate all we want, but it's not that easy. So, and again, this is a business decision. And people always make the claim as well that, well, if a Fortune 500 company is struggling financially, why don't all of the higher ups take wage cuts and stuff to afford things? And while I can agree with that, it also makes more sense to have less employed people when long term you're trying to save money. It makes sense to have less employees to worry about, because eventually it's a whole other loophole to go into, but there's just no correlation for me. And I don't know why the fans always have to keep making the same correlation. It doesn't really exist.
I can see, just jumping in there, I could see why they'd want to, because look, when you look at a player like Ozil and the kind of situation that he's been in and the way that fans feel about him, and the fact, like you said, that he's kind of been used as a scapegoat for everything, not only just for Arsenal but in Germany as well. So when you look at that, like it makes sense that's the first player people would turn to, right? But I think you hit the nail on the head in that it's just, there's so much more intricacy and nuance to these kind of contracts rather than an employment contract. So a standard employment contract for like the tea lady, for example, I'm not disparaging anyone's job that lost their job, but like that's a simple one, right? The one who serves tea to the players. I feel like when you're looking at her contract, it's a lot less complicated from a legal perspective than Ozil's contract is going to be. That where you're dealing like you were saying about things like image rights, things like sponsorship deals, certain things that are promised to you. It's a much more complicated contract, and it's not as easy to just fire a player. It's not. And I'll tell you, part of the reason is those players can afford lawyers as well, and the club knows that. So if you better believe that if they decide that they're just going to break Ozil's contract to save those 55 jobs, that they are going to get an entire law firm of letters to them, taking them into court. So that's something that they know. And as much as it would, like, the mathematics would work, we got this player that's making a lot of money, just get rid of him. It's just not feasible from a legal perspective.
Yeah, no, the one thing that I would say regarding the Ozil situation is that, yes, everybody can stand that both parties have contractual obligations to uphold to. But the one thing that nobody has touched on is Ozil's refusal to take a pay cut while everybody else did, which is something he can be scrutinized for.
Mm-hmm.
And you better believe that if this goes ahead, which, look, obviously the statement's out, it's going ahead, but if he doesn't come out and respond with some sort of message, some sort of willingness to take a pay cut, I
think that in regards to that, the reason why Ozil hasn't is because if you look at what Ozil does with his money, he's involved with a lot of like humanitarian side of stuff. And I think that the reason why he's not taking a pay cut is because he wants to be basically in control of where the money that he's getting is going to go. So I completely get the point of view that he's the one that didn't take the pay cut, earning the most money, but there's also a side of it saying that he's entitled to that. He signed that contract, and if he's not forced to take the pay cut, because I don't think it was a forced pay cut on the whole squad. It was basically a suggested. We think you should all take that for the benefit of the club. Does that make sense? Yeah,
which is also something that I don't think has been brought into the equation. So we're assuming this 55 people that got. I mean, imagine how much more would have had to gone had the players not agreed to take that pay cut.
Exactly,
I would imagine it would be more. I mean, the percentage of their salary is not insignificant, and it's a non-zero number. So you would imagine that had that not been done remember, they did that so they didn't have to fire people. So they did that to keep people on the payroll, and now it's clearly untenable. Maybe they didn't know how long this was going to continue. So now, even with those pay cuts, it's still it's still not good enough, and they had to let people go. At least that, that's kind of one way of looking at it.
It's not just that, but also when you, in terms of contract breaking with normal employees, like you said, you use the tea lady analogy, which I always will find funny for whatever reason.
It's great, isn't it?
But it is fantastic. But the thing with that is a lot of those employees, sans Cagigao or McDermott, that are the prominent names that are being thrown around, I would wager a decent bet that the majority of those were going to be contract employees, not salaried employees. Therefore, it's easier for them to have their contract broken without any legal ramifications, because the nature of when you take that on that employment as the one being employed is that I know I'm on a contract that can be broken at any time by the club. And a lot of, for example, in the scouting department, a lot of scouts in world football are actually on contracts, not on salaried by the club. And then they can be let go with ease. And they can just say, well, your time here is done. We need to make cuts or whatever have you. We can break the contract now. And there's no legal ramifications for the club. There's no legal recourse that the scout, as an example, can take. So it's likely that these are people who knew that could have been a possibility. It wasn't just, someone who was at the club for 35 years, salaried, and all of a sudden someone walked in the office and said, listen, you got to go, pack your shit, goodbye. You know what I mean? So
Interesting.
Go on.
Yeah, interesting that you bring that, because in the United States, for example, and I can tell you from experience that we have something what's called at-will employment, and without getting into too much of a boring legal explanation of it, at-will employment basically, and especially in the state I live in Florida, that you could get fired for any reason, and it's very difficult to have any repercussions of it. The UK is different. They have a much more formal contractual obligation where I'm assuming that there are certain things listed contract that allow for termination or reconsideration of the contracts. And I'm guessing, listen, I would imagine that the courts are dealing with this a lot. The UK courts are dealing with this a lot right now, especially in the pandemic, that they're going to be all over the country and the world. There are these layoffs. So a lot of the exceptions in these contracts are things like, force majeure, that could possibly, if all of a sudden the company became insolvent, all of a sudden they're not going to be liable for all these lawsuits. So it's an interesting thing to consider, that there's also that legal aspect of it as well. I don't know if we've seen the last of it, so we might be seeing lawsuits from these fired employees coming forth if there was some kind of malfeasance in the approach to how Arsenal approach it from a contractual and a legal standpoint, which is something that I don't think that me, kind of nerding out in the law there, is thinking about.
No, you're right about the UK, that you can obviously sue companies for unfair dismissal and stuff like that. So it's going to be really horrible to watch, obviously, some of the fallout of the people that have lost their jobs. Let's go into some of the specifics of who those people are. Of course, the main guy that's being touted around is, of course, Francis Cagigao, who is the head of international recruitment at Arsenal. He's been at the club for a very, very long time, most notably known for discovering Cesc Fabregas, but has also been involved in a host of different transfers, like Van Persie, involved with more recently like Martinelli, etc., and Granit Xhaka. So this guy has been fully ingrained into the Arsenal way of doing their transfers for a long time. Now, there's two schools of thought here when it comes down to what the club is doing. I have felt, and I think that, Drew, you probably agree with me in this sense, correct me if I'm wrong, but the club has always wanted to be moving towards a more agent-led side of recruitment. And this COVID situation, whilst it's necessary for these 55 people to be made redundant and for the reasons that we've talked through, but the club has effectively used this to accelerate those plans to make the club a more agent-led recruitment situation within the football club. So, Drew, is this a bad thing? It's probably the most blunt way ever I can ask this question. Is it a bad thing that Arsenal are going down the route of an agent-led recruitment system?
There's no way to quantify that at the moment. We don't know. All what I can say is two things. One, players having agents is quickly becoming the norm in football, because it's the norm in every other major professional sport, particularly in the United States. If you're talking about baseball, basketball, American football, hockey to a certain extent, all the players have agents. That's who you deal with when you're talking about, I want to trade for your player, or I want to sign your player on free agent, whatever it might be. That's who you speak to. And even in the football world, if you go to say Paul Pogba was on the transfer market, you don't deal with Paul Pogba when you want to bring him to your club. You deal with his agent. His agent then takes the information you provide him, and then he fills it to Pogba, and then they make a decision, and he's the one who deals with it. You're dealing with an intermediary. Everyone's going to have them. Even kids now that are 15, 16, 17 years old have agents. And Cesc mentioned that on Arseblog's interview with him, that now more younger and younger players are getting agents from a younger age because their tracks in football being more and more clear to them from a younger age profile. And they want to make the right choices from the ground up, not just when they start to get access to the bigger, monetary values when they're 21, 20, whatever, years old or whatever. So I do think that I don't think the club is bending its entire ability to scout. And I think this is the misnomer that a lot of fans are having. They're seeing Cagigao and McDermott are gone, so all of a sudden the club is going to not scout at all, period. That is extremism in its finest. That's not what the club is doing. What's likely, in my opinion, is happening is because someone like Cagigao was head of international recruitment, but he was also the one that directly dealt with players when they wanted to come to the club. I think that they don't want that aspect of it. My assumption is because you have someone like Hasfami in the club that deals with contracts. You have someone like Edu, who is a technical director, and he'll have a say in negotiations, I think. And then you have Raul, who is a proponent of dealing with agents in general. I think you're looking at a fact that because you have to deal with agents, you don't want to have the scouts having the say on contractual deals anymore. And Cagigao is coming from a regime or another way of thinking where scouts have a say. Because didn't Cagigao heavily broker the deal for Martinelli before Eddie was really bedded in? And I don't think that's the way the club is moving forward. And that led on to the debate John and I had about the power struggle within the club, which we can talk about later. But because agents are unavoidable now, you have to retool the way you operate in terms of player recruitment to almost be ahead of the curve. And my theory is that we're doing this now to be ahead of the curve because this is where the sport's trending. It's not that we're going to not scout, because you have to scout players. You still have to scout a player to know if you want to bring them to the club. You can't just trust the agent's word, because of course the agent's job would then to say his player is the best thing since sliced bread, and he can just lead you astray to get his client money. You still have to know what you're getting before you go into negotiations, so you know what position you can take. So scouting is not being binned. It's just that we're retooling the departments so that we can factor in the fact that you have to, agent dealings is just the way, it's just the way of it now. And it also was alluded to that the club feels like we're struggling to really get those good young players in, and we've fallen behind clubs maybe like City or Chelsea or whoever it might be, because they've been historically more willing to deal with agents, and we historically resisted it, and we probably missed out on a lot of players in that regard. So if we retool so we aren't resistant of that, if we're not completely relying on agents, but if we're ability to handle that aspect of it more openly and more progressively, then we're going to be putting ourselves in a better position moving forward. But that's my pure speculation, my opinion. I don't know if that's going to end up being true. That's just how I kind of see it. And because KSC and Kroenke are American owners and they own American sports franchises, the idea of dealing with agents is completely normal to them. And people often forget that as well.
Yeah.
So they might not be as resistant to the whole culture behind that as, say, some of the fans would be. So,
John?
Yeah, so I'm looking at that comment on the screen now. Big leg, great name. Comment on the screen. Agent-led recruitment system will end up costing us more. I think our club has been good at identifying targets, but we've always dragged our feet and wanted to play below market value. I think there's some truth to the last part of that statement, that we definitely tend at least to drag our feet when it comes to these kind of deals, to try to get every little bit of advantage we can in the negotiations. I think that it's debatable whether we've been good at identifying targets. I think in some areas we have, but look how long has it been obvious that we've needed a holding midfielder, like a really solid defensive midfielder. And I think that we've changed around that. We've adapted to it, but it was obvious for a long period of time that that's what we needed and we didn't get. And there's other examples of that. It's not just one area. We're looking at that. We've talked about on this podcast before, that season where we just got Petr Cech and nobody else in the outfield. Are you telling me that there was no one that we could have recruited that could have helped us out then? So look, I think that, like I said, that part's debatable. Whether it's going to cost us more, it might. But one thing that's interesting and I don't think is really anticipated by that comment, or it might have been, but I just didn't see it in there, was while it might cost us more, it also opens up the door to negotiations that otherwise wouldn't have happened, right? So I can imagine there's different scenarios when a player wants to go to a club, one of them being where he's going to his agent, say, I really want to live in London or something, and I want to play in the Premier League. So make it happen, right? And then the agent starts going around. Another one is where you have the club actually reaching out saying, hey, we need a player of the club. And they start reaching out to their contacts in the markets and stuff. Raul was very good with that, with his contacts in Spain and things like that. Edu very well with his kind of Brazilian connection. When it comes to these agents, a lot of them will only deal with clubs that are willing to play ball with them. And I think Drew alluded to this a little bit earlier, that in the past, we haven't done that. We've been completely against the grain with respect to dealing with these super agents. Wenger was extremely vocal about it. And I think that the board was kind of behind him in that regard. And as also was alluded, that if the trend is to shift towards this more agent-based approach, which we've seen Cesc Fabregas say in previous interviews, that younger and younger players are now getting agents, that and maybe me and Drew can speak from this from a different perspective because we're Americans and we're used to this kind of approach to sporting. I mean, players in America, basketball, football, have agents in college already before they're out of school, before they're even thinking about professional sports. So if these players, if these teams are only, these agents are going to be doing business with clubs that are allowing their services, then we're limiting ourselves in terms of the amount or the players that we're able to do business with or get based on their agent. So I think that when you look at it from that perspective, I'm not saying it will be a good thing, but if the trend is towards a more agent-based model, then necessarily our involvement now rather than later is only a positive thing, in my opinion.
No, I agree with that. And I think one of the things that we were just mentioning before was that I think fans kind of have this misunderstanding that the only agents you're going to deal with are the Kia options of the world and
Right.
Jorge Mendes. There's thousands of agents in the football world, so you still have to deal with all of them as well. And I know that super agents have that really negative connotation behind them because, justly so, they're trying to get the biggest bang for your buck for their client, or rather, they're trying to get their client the most money possible. But the fact is again, players are getting agents when they're 16 years old, and those agents, unless you are someone like a Kylian Mbappe, are not going to be a Kia option. It's going to be some sort of minor agent or an agent conglomerate group that you have to go through. And being able to have a system that can be tailored towards understanding that the agent networks that exist in other countries or in England or whatever have you, if you can tap into that resource immediately to get your feelers out to see what kind of clubs or what kind of players of this profile can we look at to suit a need that we have, and who do I speak to get in touch with these players, that's not going to hurt. It doesn't take away from scouting. You won't make that distinction until you scout the player to know, I like this player. And if you like that player, then you go to the other side of the structure and say, now I need to speak to his agent. That part of the structure can be fired up, and then you can utilize that term. So we're not getting rid of scouting. It's just we need to retool and make sure that being able to deal with agents is more important than it ever has been for the club. Because as John and I have said, if the sport's going down that pathway, which it seems like it is, you have to be able to handle it. I think that's it. So
let's Owen, I want to bring you on this point because I get the idea of agents being something that Arsenal is a necessary evil. Arsenal need to involve themselves in that market to be able to get access to certain players. But Avon Tellington brings up a really good point that it's not an issue of agents. It's the specific agent that we're being put in bed with at the moment. He brings up the situation that happened with Corinthians, where basically Kia Joorabchian took all of their young talent away and sold them loads of older players, which is ironic because we're seeing the likes of Cedric and David Luiz be brought into Arsenal, which you can kind of see some reflections going on there. So whilst I agree with what Drew's saying about agents in a general sense, the specific agent that Arsenal are getting involved with right now does concern me. Does it concern you?
Well, yeah. So basically the way I would put it is, from the minute Arsene Wenger left, we have been even in the last few years of his tenure, we have been demanding change. And unfortunately, this is what change looks like. Wenger was quite open about refusing to work with these super agents for those specific reasons that you just mentioned. as you touched on, the particular agents we are getting involved with, my concern going forward would be that um, agents like Kia and Mendes, that these, like you said, are probably the wrong type of people to be getting into bed with, and that we don't solely only operate with a select few agents. We really have to broaden horizons, because what you do then is you limit the potential incomings to a smaller pool of people. But look, as Drew said, we can't prejudge something before it's actually taking place. We don't know what way this is going. My assumption, and again only assumption, is that this has been in the pipeline for quite a while. I would imagine this could possibly be the reason we saw Sven Mislintat leave the club. So I'd say you'd be looking back that far as to when the ball sort of started rolling with this. Yeah, so one of my biggest concerns is that when you start working with these super agents rather than the scouting systems, is that there's much more room for sort of corruption within that system. We see sometimes with incoming players to other clubs the huge agent fees that are attached to the price tag. So you're looking at inflated fees on players a lot of the time. In regards to the scouts leaving the club, I would say that I've mentioned a few times in the WhatsApp group that this is just the evolution of football. I really believe that now in modern day football, we have the technology. Every league has the exposure that scouts at sort of senior level is pretty unnecessary a lot of the time, because you can really figure out, get a look at, and suss out the sort of incoming players. More so at youth level, scouting is still good, obviously, to get the players in, get them into the academy and breaking through into the first team. But yeah, no, that's my take on it. But basically, I agree with everything the two boys said. We can't judge it until we see what happens.
There's also the thing with the other side of it is, if we put a lot of faith in Mikel Arteta in terms of what he wants from the team, in terms of the work that he's doing right now, and in terms of the view that he has for the future. He has come out publicly and said that he needs to be backed. He's come out and said that he needs to improve in certain areas of the team. And I can't see him being someone that just plays for happy families and says, oh, well, Kia wants to bring in Coutinho. And then I've just seen some news been breaking about supposedly Coutinho has been now turned down by Arsenal, is the latest information that's been going around social media this evening. And maybe that's down to Arteta. Maybe it's finally got to the manager's door. The club's gone to him and said that we've been offered Coutinho. We've sorted out a deal for him. Are you happy to tick this off? And Arteta might have turned around and said, no, we don't want that to happen. That might be a scenario. I'm not saying it is. But the thing is that whoever comes in, no matter who it is, Arteta has to sign off on it, in my opinion. And if we are to trust the process, then we need to trust the signatures that the club are bringing in with the okay of Arteta.
Yeah, I think John and I are going to go into handbags to who wanted to jump in first, but I think we're about to agree. So
do it. Handbags, please.
So just quickly, you can't be upset about going after Villian because he has Kia, but we're also potentially going to get Gabriel, who also has a big agent. You can't say yes for this, but no for this. That's the nature of it. It's no different than if you didn't deal with agents and you risk getting a player over here and a player over there, and they come off differently. Again, I just kind of feel like, and you said it, I think it's already been made clear that Arteta has a say about who we bring in for his squad building. I think that's been made pretty clear by not just him, but the setup as well. So when people say nonsense things like, well, we can't allow agents to dump players on our club, that's not what happens. It's not like the agents force their players onto our payroll and we're just stuck with them. That's not how it works. Arteta will get a say in sign-off. I don't like this player. He's not what I was looking for. Right position, wrong profile player. Period. Yeah. And then we move forward. You could have the same thing for maybe if Per is looking to get someone into the youth academy set up and he's dealing with an agent. Same exact premise. It's not like we don't have a say just because the player has an agent. That drives me bonkers when people say that. And Arjen keeps saying the same thing for the last week, that Kia is just going to dump players on the club. Like we don't have a choice in who we bring on and who we build with. Of course we do. So,
and that kind of segues perfectly. And actually, what my comment was going to be, it's something, Tom, that you mentioned earlier, that I don't know if it's the case, but I would be extremely concerned if it was the case. And what was said was that, let's just say, like Coutinho, all the deal gets done and then it gets brought to Arteta's door for a veto. That would be an extreme, egregious waste of club resources if that were the case. That all these negotiations, this time spent getting this deal over the line, and finally it gets to the manager's door, and you get at the 25th hour goes, nah, not the kind of player I'm really looking for. No, veto. I don't think that's how it works at all. I think that the club have to come to him and have some, if he has any say in the final player decision, it cannot be at the 25th hour. It needs to be during the process. He needs to say, fine, but I need these players more. And as long as and agree to the kind of the structure of any kind of deals that we would be doing, right? So if that's the case, and we know that Arteta must, I think, necessarily have a say in the process, at least the type of player we're getting, and be informed up before the 25th hour, then then it makes more sense, because look, otherwise it's extremely concerning, and I don't think that's the way that we operate, and I don't think that's the way we should operate. And as Drew said, I mean, agents can help that situation, because it opens the door for more players. The best players are going to be getting agents now. Why? Because they're professionals. They play sports, right? They're not necessarily businessmen. These people are professional deal makers. That's why you get an agent in the first place. That's the whole point. They're going to try to get the best deal for their client, and they're going to work with clubs that are willing to work with them. And these players know it. What does it mean when you get a super agent as a player? And a lot of times it means you're going to end up getting more money wherever you go, and you're going to have to deal with a lot less hassle. It's the same reason why you hire any kind of consultant in any kind of business. It's why you hire a lawyer before you go into business. It's why you hire a doctor for their opinion in medical. It's their profession. This is what they know, the business of football and how to get deals done. So to say that we're just not going to deal with any of them, I think really doesn't understand. It really misunderstands the nature of the business of football and what it means as a player going forward, in terms of their career choices, in terms of their opportunities, and as a club in terms of recruitment.
I think there's a really good question that came in. I'm going to find it now, but effectively it was asking, do you think the club, Mike Hernandez, good friend of the show and member, says, do you think the club gave Unai as much power as they gave Arteta? My answer to that initially would be no, because I felt like when Unai Emery came in, effectively he was a bit of a puppet, and all his job was to coach the team and try and get results on the pitch. And with Arteta has the ball firmly in his court now, from winning the FA Cup and from improving players in such a short space of time. He can now go to the board and say, I want XYZ players in this summer, and effectively they can go, right, we'll try and do what we can to get those players. And he can be like, no, I need those players if you want me to progress this team. You've seen what I can do with these players that we currently have, and I think we can all agree that they aren't the best Arsenal squad that we've ever had. And yet he's taken them from a point of utter rock bottom of being so far down the league table to the point where he couldn't save them enough to keep them into the Europa League, but got them turned around, winning big games against Liverpool and in the FA Cup against Man City and Chelsea, to a point where he has the ball so firmly in his court that after a year, another club like a Real Madrid, if Zidane goes, or a Manchester City, if Pep Guardiola goes, could go, Arteta is clearly an amazing coach. It's improving players. If he's given near unlimited resources, there's no telling what this guy could do. And Arteta could look at it and say, I'm in a situation where I've improved players. I've done everything I possibly can. I've won trophies, and the club is still not allowing me to flourish as much as I could if I was backed. There is no reason why I couldn't turn around and go, right, I'm going to go off to Real Madrid or to Barcelona or to Manchester City, because they'll give me the backing, the resources that I need to be the best head coach that I can be. And that's why Arsenal need to be so stringent and so careful with how they handle the Arteta situation, and do as much as they utmostly can to get the players in that he needs.
Yeah, I'll follow on from that. I think the thing that we need to remember, as well as the club, backing Arteta, it's important that the fans do too. I'll just go back to the Willian deal. It's sort of ruffled a few feathers within the fan base. But as you mentioned there, Arteta isn't taking this guy in for no reason at all. We've been talking about it in the WhatsApp group, and just mentioned it today on your tactical breakdown podcast, that we have started looking at players on the wrong side of 30. Athletes nowadays are just completely different. So if Arteta is looking at someone like a Willian to come in, put it like this: if we ended the transfer window this season, and Arteta had Willian, Partey, and Gabriel three come in, that's a good transfer window. And you have to remember as well is that with our wingers, we have Saka, Martinelli, Pepe. Willian is the perfect type of player that we need to take in. He's not going to block a path for too long. He isn't going to cost anything. His wages aren't going to be ridiculously high compared to some. So I think that we need to look at some of these players that he's going to take in. And look, if Arteta wants Coutinho, whether that deal falling through is true or not, if he wants Coutinho, we might not want it. It might not make financial sense, but we have to sort of stick by him because he's done nothing to show any cause for concern up to now.
So, I mean, real fast, I agree with that, and I struggle with this, and I've even wrote about it, that I don't agree with the finances behind getting someone like Coutinho. But if Arteta came out and said, I want Coutinho, I would have to eat my hat and say, well, if Arteta wants him, it doesn't matter what argument I can levy. If the manager thinks he's going to improve and he fits his system, I have to trust Arteta. And I think we're kind of all in that same boat. And just real fast, I know people are talking about how they want to avoid situations where, you kind of rely on agents. So two things. One, agents don't necessarily pawn their players off to a club, right? So you normally will ask if an agent represents a player of a position you want, you go to the agent. And sometimes the agent might say, listen, my player is available. Do you have any interest? You can then say yes or no. And just because you say no to the agent doesn't mean the agent's going to be like, well, screw you. You didn't want my player. I'm never speaking to you again. But also, Wolves, for example, have done a really good job building a squad with Jorge Mendes. But people often forget that not every player that Wolves have bought since they've been promoted have been through him. Then Donker, as a prime example, has no connection to him. That's a prime example. And he's a player of promise who can grow within that system and has plenty of potential. So just because you might have a link to a big name agent doesn't mean every deal you're going to do moving forward involves that agent. I think we kind of just have to we have to come to terms with that. And I'm not saying that every deal we should be doing shouldn't be going through an agent, but the whole premise of this entire thing was that we can't be so resistant to it like we were in the past. We have to be more progressive. That's it.
But I think you have to remember as well that the likes of these sort of low cost deals, the likes of Luis, the likes of Willian, these are what I look at as little sweeteners. So they're low cost, they're relatively low risk because of the age of the players. And then when the jackpot comes along, if you will, then you're sweet with that agent, and that agent is willing to do business with you over everybody else. It's a case of you scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Well, sure, I don't disagree with that. But the other thing is, if you look at our finances in the market, those deals suited our need at the time. So it happened to the cards just fell that way because we haven't been able to shell out the money that we really need. We're not that's just without Champions League football, without winning the league, without finishing top four, without all that additional revenue, we miss out on a lot of money we can turn back over and then go after bigger players. If we were finishing second in the league and we have never missed out on Champions League, you would think we would have gone after David Luiz? I highly doubt that. It's just
but I think Ewan's point is well taken, though. And when you, especially when you consider if we accept the premise as true that the kind of culture is shifting in the football landscape is shifting towards this agent-based approach, getting in with these kind of low risk. And I mentioned it before, so I totally agree with you that getting in to these low risk kind of deals are ways of kind of opening the door slightly with these agents, so that when all of a sudden, I'm just going to throw this name out there, Ronaldo, whatever, wants to come to the Premier League again, okay, whatever. But you get the idea, though. All of a sudden now, who are they going to come to? We're at least in the conversation. Right?
I don't disagree with that.
And obviously, Kia doesn't. I don't think Kia represents Ronaldo, and I don't think Ronaldo is going to come here. And if he did, I don't think he would come to Arsenal. So that's not what I'm saying. But you get the point. When one of these bigger names become available, now it's like you've already given me. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I agree with that.
I don't disagree with that, but I also think that we wouldn't be doing it just for the sake of that. Those players still have to suit a need that has to be filled. We wouldn't
But
just be
which,
getting a player off
but,
that one basis. You know what I mean?
But which they did, because if you think of our needs now, that look, this is the way, and I hate going back to transfers because that's all we ever talk about. But
It's a summer after all.
Yeah, this is all right. So.
but the likes of look, whatever you want to say about him, David Luiz, Cedric, Willian coming in, these are players to me. They make more sense than some of these sort of more obscure players that have a good reputation within mainland Europe, and they're looking to come in, because what you have there is he might, or he maybe, he might work, he maybe could be good. But what you have with Willian, and look, this is frustrating the life out of me. Go and look at Willian's statistics over the last 5 years. They haven't dipped. They haven't dipped at all. They're consistent, completely consistent. So what you're getting there is a guaranteed, all right, maybe not the top level winger, but you've got a robust player who's proven with consistently decent statistics and a willingness to play in multiple roles within the team. So like you said there, that is a very good point, that these deals make sense now at this time. And for me, the likes of your Jack Grealishes or whoever you want to name, big money signings, that's fine when we make Champions League and we have that money coming in. It's fine to take them risks there, but for now we need the finished article. We have no time for projects.
I get really frustrated with the Willian stuff, and exactly what you were talking about in terms of like where he's at, because I looked at the FA Cup final bench and thought, crap, like if this goes into extra time, we are stuffed, because we lack so much depth in this team. It's ridiculous. And yet I just can't get my head around why people are willing to just turn down someone that's playing nearly week in, week out for Chelsea currently, for a wage which and the thing is, people saying this guy's going to be earning 100 and something grand when he's 35. Players don't suddenly start accepting lower wages just because they're getting older. Like, whether they go to China or the MLS or somewhere, and they become one of the highest paid players in the league. And staying at Arsenal for Willian for £130,000, which is the most reportedly consistent fee that I've seen put around now, whilst I get that there would be a substantial signing on fee, it still makes sense for Arsenal to do that. And Arsenal are going to be playing in multiple competitions next season with the Europa League qualification that we're going to need to be able to rotate. You've also got a situation where the alternatives to that, because we do need depth up top, because last season our attacking options off the bench, besides Pepe, Laka and Alba, were Saka and Nelson as wide players, with Martinelli being injured for the long term. And even Martinelli being in, whilst is a great talent, is not experiencing of enough quality to really add enough to this team to like sort of extend us out through the season with rotation. Bringing in sorry, Drew, very quickly, just let me finish.
No.
The alternative to bringing in Willian is to sign someone younger. Now, if you want to sign someone younger, it's very, very difficult to get someone coming to the end of their deal. The best example you're going to find is Malang Sarr, which is for a different position on the pitch. And so, therefore, you're going to be looking to spend a fair chunk of money to bring in someone in a wide area. There's no point spending 20 to 30 million pounds on someone that's going to be backup. So bring in someone that's going to be free, bring in someone that's already transitioned to the Premier League, and bring someone in that's going to make an impact. And William provides you with all of those things. Go on, Drew. Interrupt me all
right, Tom. No, I agree with you, but the thing that drives me nuts is not drives me nuts, and like I can kind of understand it, because I think a lot of American sporting culture is built on the whole premise of there's a lot of romanticism amongst the fan base about the young players coming through and proving themselves. But if you are completely honest with yourselves, and you just said it, if you looked at that bench, were you really filled with confidence about looking at how much confidence did you have? You could say they're bright young talents, but how the odds of them changing a game are reduced. And if you were honest, if that deal comes off, he walks into the club as the best forward player we have, bar Aubameyang, Pepe, and Lacazette. He's better than Nelson. He's better than Saka. He's better than Emile Smith-Rowe. He's better than Martinelli. That's the fact. It doesn't matter that he's 31. That he's going to be on 130,000 pounds a week. He's a better footballer than they are. That does not mean they won't be better than him later. They'll progress as players, maybe they won't. I don't know. We don't know that. But the fact is, Willian's a better footballer than they are. Will that improve us? Immediately, yes. Will it give us more consistency in performances? Yes. Will it give us a deeper bench moving forward into a season that now includes Europa League? Yes. These are all factors that you have to look at when you're building a squad. A squad can't always be the romantic version of, I want to win things with kids. There's a reason why Wenger said you don't win things with kids. And he wasn't saying you can't have young players in your team. He was saying that you will never win the league or Champions League with a team that is immeasurably younger than another team that has experience in it. Experience counts for a lot in professional sports. It doesn't mean you're going to try and go out and sign a 45-year-old. No. But at 31, Willian's not even that old. Willian's younger than I am, and I'm not old.
No, you are. You are old.
So there you go.
No, well, look, let's put it down. Look, the best way for me to describe this is if I'm Kieran Tierney, and we're playing in the Carling Cup or something like that there, and we were starting that game against Chelsea, and you were talking about being up against Mason Mount or being up against Willian. I would much rather be up against Mason Mount than Willian. When I seen his name on the bench, I was said, thank God, because he can look, maybe not every single week, but he can be devastating when he wants to be. You know, and look, I'm gonna say this here, and I know I'm gonna cop so much crap for it in the chat, and you boys might disagree with me, but I don't see Reece Nelson making it at Arsenal. And the competition for Pepe on that side will only push him on. And at the minute, he doesn't have that competition. He doesn't.
I never understood the hesitance people had with Willian, even with his age. I mean, every time I would watch Chelsea, I always thought he was a shining player for them. Yeah, I mean, he's not the greatest player on earth. He doesn't score the most goals or assists, but his technical ability on the ball, his ability to break tackles and to get to dribble past people, his ability to create chances. I mean, every time I watch him, I was always like, man, I kind of wish he played for us. So I'm not saying that that the age isn't a consideration that we shouldn't consider, but he's such a good player. I think it's just technically gifted.
Sorry, John, I've interrupted you now. I'm such a hypocrite.
Turn.
Put it in blunt terms. Say if we're in that game, right, and we're playing against a team in the lower half, and we're drawing, and it's a really important game that we need to win. And on the bench, say if this is Brighton when we were losing. I know that we conceded really late on, but we needed a goal to win that game against Brighton. If you're Brighton players and you know that you're trying not to concede and hopefully hitting Arsenal on the counter attack, and you see that Arsenal bringing on Reece Nelson, you're like, for Pepe, you're like, okay, if they bring on Willian,
it's great.
It's a different thing. Like bringing on Willian compared to, and this is obviously, and Reece Nelson's got a lot of potential. And it's not a bash at Reece Nelson. It's really not. The point is about having experienced depth within the squad and not simply relying on the youngsters to come on. I'm going to contradict myself in a minute when we talk about sort of attacking midfield options, which I think we probably should move on from the Willian stuff, otherwise we'll be here forever. But in terms of attacking midfield thing, Emile Smith-Rowe has had an amazing season at Huddersfield, half a season at Huddersfield. Obviously, on the channel, we had a chat with David Webb, who was the former Huddersfield director, head of football operations. And he was talking about him being in the club, as in being the Raul Senyehi of Huddersfield, was involved in the presentation process, which brought the young guy to Huddersfield. Said from his time knowing him in the USAT when he was at Spurs, this guy is of Premier League quality right now.
Go watch that if you haven't seen it.
Yes, if you haven't seen that.
And the technical breakdown.
But like he is of Premier League quality at this moment in time, as according to a head of football operations at a well-known football club. It's the worst way to describe that possible. But like, I don't get why the need to go out and spend 220 grand a week on wages for a Coutinho when you've got someone that good, that young, coming through the club already. Give him minutes. Give him time on the pitch. Play him as a number 8. Play him as a number 11. He plays on the wing. He's played at central attacking mid. He's played at centre mid. He can play in multiple positions on the pitch. There's no reason. And I'll tell you what, I'm a lot more excited about him than I am Joe Willock right now, personally.
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, didn't Arteta come out and say that he was impressed by Emile Smith-Rowe and that he saw him having a role coming next season? I don't think he gets loaned out again. I think we keep him. And I do think that I don't want to make the comparison because it's skirting on kind of thin ice, but you can almost see kind of a similar track that you saw with Jack Wilshere, who came up through the youth ranks quite well, but he didn't really turn the eye until he had that lone move at Bolton, where he won Young Player of the Year in the championship. Did he not? And then he came back to us, and then he immediately was in the starting 11 his first year at Arsenal after doing well in the championship. So if Emile Smith-Rowe can have some sort of same arc as Wilshere would, it would make complete sense. Yeah, and in that point there would be no point in getting Coutinho because they take up the same position.
Yeah, and we have an opening for him with Europa League. We got Europa League.
Correct.
This is look what happened with Saka. Look what happened with Martinelli. Yeah. These players were able to break through in this competition. We're there now. We need players to rotate anyway.
Yeah.
But my only concern is with Smith Rowe, is that he's probably best suited to that number 10 role. I don't really, and when I look at Arteta next season, look, the reason I'm the most bothered about the Coutinho link is this: Coutinho in a centre attacking midfield role is devastating. I think he was for Liverpool, but when he made his move to Barcelona and then eventually Bayern, he's been predominantly playing on the left, that's what I attribute to his drop in statistics over the past two seasons or so. But I see Arteta going for that Liverpool style of playing with 6 and 2 8s, and that's the only concern I maybe have with Smith Rowe. Is he physically up to the test of playing either one of them 2 number 8 roles or number 6 role, or where does he fit in? It's very
he's really good at like taking the ball out from a deeper position, so I feel like he can play that 8 role.
Yeah,
are talking about Smith Rowe now, right?
Yeah.
I think he could as well. I think he could do both, which I think would be helpful for us. But that's the thing. And someone mentioned that he's getting overrated and that distance makes the heart grow fonder, I think was the comment. I think there might be some truth to that, but we're not going to know that by sending him on another loan that's just going to do the same thing, right? Eventually you just need to get thrown into it, and you either sink or swim. All right. And you could say whether it's too early for that right now, but I trust the people behind the scenes to make that decision. If they think that he's the player to come in right now, and knowing that there's going to be an avenue for him, like I mentioned earlier with Europa League, I think you get to tinker with him a little bit. So then we could see if you're right there, and that maybe that's not his best role. The only way to know what his best role for Arsenal in reality and as it plays out is to have him play for Arsenal. So. Mm-hmm. I think that's why I would like to see him come back next season.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential in that guy, and there's a lot of people in the chat saying that Joe Willock needs a loan. I think that would benefit him. He's played a lot so far this season. I think he hit up to like 50 appearances or something in terms of like starts and subs, but I just feel like he needs a full season of starting every single game to really know what he's about. I think Nketiah is another example. The amount of development that needs to happen at the age that they're both at now needs to be done week in, week out. I'm not sure that is going to happen at Arsenal. And also, like, the striking situation at Arsenal is really strange. We don't really know what's going to go on with Lacazette. There's apparently really concrete talks going on between him and Juventus. And what that would mean for how Arteta approaches his striking position next season. I doubt he would want to move Aubameyang into the middle for how he wants his striker to play as basically a centre forward that drops back into a number 10 position to sort of drive the play and then bring the 2 wide players more inside to become effectively strikers in themselves, like Aubameyang and Pepe have done. So it's going to be really weird to see it in that. There's sort of some final news that I wanted to cover, and it kind of goes back on ourselves ever slightly around scouting. Of the 55 people that were made redundant, there was quite a few scouts. We've already talked about Cagigao. Brian McDermott was another one. There's the head of UK scouting as well, was also gone. Drew, I'll come to you first. Like, with the approach moving towards agents, how effective is scouting still like to be used at the club that limits the scouting structure within it? Or do you actually think there was maybe too many in that department and the club sort of streamlining things to sort of focus and reevaluate the way that they scout at the club?
I think maybe there was too many. Just because you're relying on agents doesn't mean you scout. And again, I'll use the American sports analogy for it. In some sports, and in some states in the United States, players are scouted when they're in middle school, when they're 12, 13 years old. They're already getting college scouts going to games, for basketball games, for American football games, for soccer games, for football games, rather. So scouting still plays a vital role. in player acquisition. You have to know what you're getting, and it's not you can't just scout a player once or twice and say, "I like what I've seen." Scouting takes weeks, months, years, even. And you and I, Tom, have had conversations like with Oliver Zeziger, for example, about the nature of scouting. Sometimes a scout will go see a player 25 times to be thorough, to know for a fact unequivocally they can go to their boss or bosses and say, "Here's the player that you wanted me to look at. Here's what I have found." In-depth reports, and then they take that information, and then if they like that profile, then they go to start conversations with the agent to open up potential negotiations. So just because we're getting rid of Cagigao and McDermott and maybe streamlining and get rid of one or two more, it doesn't mean we're going to stop scouting. It just means scouting is going to be separate from the idea of dealing with the actual contractual things that move forward. There's no overlay at that point. Scouting has their role, and then Hassan in the contracts, and then Edu as a technical director, they go on and they do what they need to do to get the player done. But you still need scouts. You're never going to stop scouting players. That's so. I don't know why people. Again, like I said before, it's not like we're going to end up just dealing with what the agents say their players can bring. It doesn't work that way. So.
Yeah, no, I think when you look at what scouting needs to be, it needs to be very specific, and it needs to be tailored to the coach that's at the club. It needs to be tailored to the system that the club wants to move forward with. And if that's not happening, then it does need to be reevaluated. I mean, I get there was before we came on air, Owen and John raised two counterpoints. Basically, Owen went down the route of saying, and I raised this to Drew earlier, is that if you look at the recruitment over the last decade, Arsenal have declined in that area, and Arsenal's recruiting has not improved our situation with the players that we brought in. There's been some gems. We look at the likes of Kieran Tierney more recently, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, but there's also been a lot of players that were brought in that just didn't really cut it and are still at the club, costing us quite a bit of money. You look at Kolasinac, you look at Socrates as examples, but John, you also say that there is a lot of examples of players that did cut it quite well. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that with this sort of shift away from mass scouting on a massive scale to more maybe specific scouting, with the conjunction with big agents being involved in fees and involved with bringing their clients into the club, is that we could see a change where higher profile players are brought into the club that suit the system that Arteta wants. Because again, we come back full circle to saying the players that come in need to be tailored to the coach that's in charge.
I think that one way to really simplify my view on how the scouting works in relation to agents is now the box that you are checking when you're saying, okay, this is what we're looking for, right? You get to check the agent box now. That you know what I'm saying? When before, if that was in the list of things that surrounded a certain player, it was a no-go from the bat, right? Now you get to target. You have a specific targeting scout, like you said. How would you say it? You said it way better than I just did. You have targeted scouting, which is a lot like, hey, look, we need the specific type of player or the specific age profile or the specific position. And then you go out and you find that particular position, right? Now you have that plus being able to go to these agents with all these contacts and say, this is also what we need. So there's the actual football scouting from the perspective of a guy going and sitting in some League 3 side 25 times in the freezing cold. And then there's also let's see what can we get from these agents as well. So I think there's an interplay between the scouting from, all right, let me actually watch the player play football, and what kind of talent pool is out there that now we have contacts and connections to from a business perspective.
Anyone else want to come in on that quickly before we wrap things up?
Owen, do you have something to say?
Sounds like you need to
tell you what it is.
It sounded accusatory.
You want to know, every evening that you have a podcast up, I watch the show. So I thought I was watching it. I fucking forgot I was on it. No, look, basically the way I say this is that.
John, I love John. He's so good. I love watching John. He's
got that soothing voice. No, look, there's good sides and bad sides to everything. The one thing I will say is, for a scouting team, I'm very unaware as to what sort of due diligence they did with the signings that we made. everybody's heard of this here sort of computer program that they entered, and you enter what you're looking for, and statistically they give you a good match. So I'm not sure how often their bum was on the bench watching players physically, and how much was spent in offices doing research, so on and so forth. Obviously, for a club the size of Arsenal, there is still going to be some sort of scouting network within this club. But the one thing I will say is that for years we have been demanding top signings, big name signings, and this is probably the most likely way we're going to get it. Whether you think it's clean or you think it's dirty, this is probably the best route we have to getting them names into this club.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. Again, that's something John said before, that John and I are completely used to that aspect as American. Like, I don't know how many people who aren't in America who know who Scott Boras is, but if you're like a baseball fan,
big time,
you do not get the top talent in Major League Baseball without speaking to Scott Boras. And he has players that he's the agent of across almost every team in Major League Baseball. You have to deal with him if you want to get someone like Giancarlo Stanton or whoever it is. It's just the nature of it. And again, because not for nothing, a lot of times there's been historical evidence to suggest that players poorly manage themselves when they go into contract negotiations, and then they try to be the ones negotiating, because then clubs will take advantage of them because they know they're not educated on the matter. But a lot of agents literally they understand contractual law. A lot of them actually are lawyers, and they use that degree, and they go and become a sports agent. So they understand contract law. So that's why agents exist. And that's why as more and more money comes into football is a massive global thing, and money is more prevalent now than it ever was. So wages are going to be even more prevalent. Agents coming into the game more now makes more sense than ever. So and the thing no one's really mentioning is, everyone talked about the fact that, Raul had the same approach at Barcelona with agents. Tom, you could probably shed a little bit on that, but people forget that Raul was at Nike before he was at Barca. And when you're at Nike, you are able to look at how Nike operates and see trends building in sports years before it happened. So he would have likely known that this might be the way this sport was going. And so immediately when he went to Barca, he automatically instituted that kind of policy where he likes to deal with agents. There was likely a reason for it. I'm sure there was multiple reasons, but you can't discount the fact that he could have easily said, this is just a way of it now. As more money comes in, you have to deal with people's representatives. That's just how it normally is. So same thing with if you're in the music business. Do you think the artist is the one that you speak to when you want to book him or her?
No. Think about, album? You know what it reminds me of? Have you ever seen the show Entourage?
Of course.
Do you remember Ari Gold? Probably one of the greatest characters written on TV, I think.
Of all time. 100%.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeremy Piven's character, I know that but it's relevant. It plays a Hollywood agent, and he's actually representative of a real agent in real life. The character is based on a real person that Mark Wahlberg knew, who wrote the show. Anyway, the reason I bring it up is because our show's going on a little longer, so we can say stuff like this, and second, because if you watch that show, you'll know that you don't get to talk to Vinny Chase without going through with Art Gold, right? In fact, you don't even get to talk to him. You go through his friend who talks. And my point is that Drew's 100% right. And it's something that American sports fans are completely used to. And I think a lot of talent, in Hollywood as well, is something that you go through an agent. It's someone just go film the movie or kick the ball. That's all you do. You're the athlete or the actor or whatever. And I was mentioning that earlier on the podcast. The agent it's their job to actually make the deals and know the business of the football side. And I think if you've read Ozil's autobiography, he talks a little bit about this, where he was talking about how his relationship with his agent, and a lot of the times, like, he didn't want to deal with any of it. He would just say, he would have conversations with his father, but really it was get the deal done. This is what I want. And that was it. And they would talk through his agents. The exception was Arsene Wenger, who called him personally. But that's a different conversation.
Another good show to watch if you want to have like comical curiosity about agents is if you're watching Ballers. Ballers directly deals with what it's like to be a professional athlete dealing with their agents and whatnot. So it's just a way of life at this point.
Are you both agents for those two shows? Because it feels like you are at this stage.
100%.
Yeah, I actually have to mention it 3 times, or else I actually get penalized for it.
Yeah, we don't talk about penalising after the logo that came through. But in terms of,
I can't believe you just went there.
Wow.
I liked it.
Yeah.
It's an inside joke. But in terms of the sort of way we want to wrap up the show, because I lost my train of thought with Peter's jokes going inside my head there. But in terms of where we're at, I'm just sort of waiting to see how things are approached by the club. Right now, Willian looks very, very likely. Gabriel, as we talked about at the start of the show, if you've joined us late and you're wondering, where's all the Gabriel stuff? Well, we talked about that right at the beginning of the show, and it seems, according to some very interesting and highly regarded legal sources, that Arsenal have jumped the queue in the race, and he seems to be very keen on a move to the Arsenal, which I have to wait and see on that one if any more info comes out in the coming days. In terms of other players, Thomas Partey's gone very quiet, which I imagine is because of the Champions League restarting very soon. He's obviously involved in that, and we'll see more movement on the Thomas Partey stuff after the conclusion of that tournament. So don't worry if suddenly things go quiet. Things are going on, I'm sure, but with the Champions League being played, that will have an impact on that deal. Am I hopeful? I was about 80-20 2 months ago, but I'm about 50-50 at this stage. It's probably fair to say.
98%.
Yeah, 97 if you're weighing. But yes, there's been lots to talk about. I've really enjoyed today's show. Before I say goodbye to my guests, the real Janice did ask me very quite rightly to point out and send our thoughts out to the people that are affected by the disaster that happened in Beirut very recently. We know there's a lot of Arsenal fans out in Beirut. They've got their own Gunners sort of a supporters club over there as well. So our thoughts are with the families of the people that are affected by that. I saw the video and it is absolutely horrific what happened there. So really, if you are watching the show and you know anyone out there, please send our thoughts to those people. And if you're not, we are sending our thoughts and prayers to you 100%. Anyway, thank you ever so much for tuning in. If you have enjoyed the show, please make sure you drop a like on the video, because we've had at peak 600 people listening at the same time, which is very, very good. And we appreciate every single one of you tuning in. So if you could drop us a like to give us some thanks for putting on an hour and a half show for you, we would really appreciate it. And we would also love it if you came and follow us at the Gooner Talk TV. Thank you, Drew. You can find Drew at FM Lara. Cheers, mate.
Happy to be here.
There you go. John at 305 Cast, any plans for another? I mean, I should say your post FA Cup, which was pointed out in the chat box to me, I think it was Mike Hernandez that did it with Claire, was fantastic. So plug that, fella.
Yeah. Go at 305 Cast. We're on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. So go give us a listen, a like, review, stars, or whatever. It's a lot of fun. I'm glad I'm doing it again, and thanks, Tom, for again pushing me to do that. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it with. I couldn't have done it without you, my friend. So that's where we're at. But no, it's a lot of fun, and I do have some good guests lined up. It's awesome to be able to talk to Arsenal fans. That's my favorite thing to do, I think, in sports, is just talk to other fans of teams that I support as well. So, and that goes for Arsenal mostly, but just because there's so much to talk about, isn't there?
Well, Javier says, when's the next podcast, John? Are you going to tell him? Do we know?
Yeah, I think this week I'm aiming to do one this week. Like I said, I'm doing another article interview for your website and for this website.
Our website, John.
Our website. I know. I have to call it his website by contract.
Yes, true.
No, I'm just kidding. But look, I really appreciate everyone that listens to it. It's a lot of fun to make them, and yeah.
Awesome. And Owen, of course, we've got your article on David Luiz coming out on Friday. Looking forward to that, son.
Yeah, definitely. This way. I don't have a podcast. I don't know what's going on here. I'm dyslexic. Leave me alone. No, I don't have a podcast. I'm not on iTunes. You can come over to my Twitter, but I mostly post inappropriate memes and dirty jokes on that. So
let's get you. You can come on my podcast.
I know to make you a logo.
Yeah. No, I only come on here when you're really stuck for guests. So no, cheers for having me on again, in all seriousness. And yeah, definitely check out the David Luiz article coming out on Friday.
Yeah, 100%. Right now, if you're still stuck and you've got an hour before you go to sleep or a bit longer, please do click the link to the website in the description and give a read of some of the articles that we've done, especially Owen's biographies on Tierney and Granit Xhaka, which have been fantastic. John's been putting out some stuff in regards to how his journey was from over in America all the way up to here, where he met me. We went to a Palladium. It was a romantic.
I have a video that I'll be posting as well. Not from that trip, but not the Palladium. Unfortunately, there's no Palladium involved. But The video from one of my trips, I think to the North London Derby, at one point. It's not the first time I ever went, but yeah, they are quality, by the way, Owen. Those articles are sick.
Cheers, man. Thank you. It's all true.
Me and you are all up in the air with what we're going to be writing because of what's happened today, but we'll be pushing through some content very, very soon. Final thing, just before we wrap up, I want to say a massive thank you to our expert members who obviously help us out with putting on these shows every single time. Robert, Abdullah, Rootgrass, Afnan, Clarify, Zamir, Ashwin, Owen, Mike, Carl, Gary, Matt, from Dial Square to Where, Olisola, Glenn, Mosaic, PMHK, Brian Robles, Jared Carver, and today joining up, TD Shifts rejoined us as an expert member. Thank you ever so much, pal, for rejoining us. We had Mike join up as well as a TGT member, Carter Stage join up as a TGT member as well, and the real Janice joined up as an expert member as well. If you are an expert member, or actually if you're any member, keep your eye on the community tab on the channel, which some people asked where that was. If you're on your YouTube app on your phone, you go onto the right-hand side at the top of the main channel screen, and there's a tab that says community. That's where I put all the regular posts and things for the members. There's going to be an opportunity for you to ask a very special person some special questions next week. So please make sure you tune in for that. And if you would like to help support the channel, then just click the join button in the link in the description and help us to get this podcast to as good as it possibly can be. I've dragged this out as long as I feasibly can to get to that 1 hour 30. It means absolutely nothing. It's my OCD that wants to get it to that number. Thank you ever so much, people. Hit the like button, as GP says there, and we'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.